Good advice already, I think. This month, and this is the last week of the month. Wow, where did February go? And we even got an extra day, and it's just gone almost. But we've been talking about some amazing stories and sort of stories that couldn't happen any other time in history. This idea of an initial public offering of a corporation where we can be part of these amazing companies that change our world. And we've not just been talking about corporations, we've actually been talking about people like Bill Gates. We've been talking about a young man who starts a company, develops this operating system, which for better or worse, changes our world, and then takes the company public and creates, I think, 3 billionaires and over 1,200 millionaires out of just that initial public offering of people who were part of the company. And then the next week we talked about someone who's very different, someone affected by this idea of an IPO, of an initial public offering. I introduced you a couple weeks ago to Bonnie Brown, and she was a middle-aged masseuse who was she'd just gone through a horrible divorce. She's sleeping on her sister's couch, kind of thinks her life is over, and happens to answer an ad in the paper for, back when they had papers, believe it or not, for a in-house massage therapist at a little company called Google. Well, long story short, when Google went public in 2004, she walked away with over $10 million in stock options, and now has actually she has a charity that she does around the world. And then last week, I introduced you to another guy who's just sort of amazing, I think, Jamie Siminoff, who actually went on Shark Tank and they turned him down. They said, your idea for Doorbot is not going to win around here. But he had a good idea. He had an idea of a doorbell that was connected to a camera that was connected to your iPhone or your Android that would show you who was dropping off the package and allow, as we found out later, Amazon to watch your kids outside as well as inside, because this sort of guy who, was a failure on Shark Tank, whose company was about to go out of business, was bought by Amazon for $1 billion. And that's not Dr. Evil saying that. That's actually $1 billion. And so he sold out and couldn't be happier. But it was funny, I was thinking, like, all of these amazing stories, all of these people whose lives were changed by IPOs, and sort of all I could think out of all these stories, like the only connection that I have is sort of like, I might own some of that stock, and it's somewhere in a retirement fund, in an IRA or 401k, and I kind of feel like, I guess I should read the prospectus, right? Like, I don't know about you, and maybe you go, oh, no, I'm fully invested and I think about it a lot. I don't. Like, my only connection to all those stories, even though technically they are really exciting and amazing, like, those are real stories too, right? Like, we can go, these are true stories. People's lives were actually changed, but all I can think, excuse me, is, I wonder if I should actually read those booklets they send you every year, and you kind of go, I don't even know, like, I'm staring at all the symbols, and you go, I sort of just hope my financial advisor is not screwing us. So I was thinking, like, we have this amazing ability as humans, and I bet you're a lot like me in the fact that we know there's this opportunity out there. We know that, corporations are a real thing, and that being part of stock is a pretty amazing opportunity. Like, that didn't happen until the 1600s. So we've only had a few hundred years where average people like you and I could place our money not in, like, a box in the backyard or even in a bank, but actually be part of these huge corporations that could actually allow us to retire with dignity and then pass something on to our family. I mean, that's pretty impressive. That's sort of amazing, but it still just sort of feels like, it's retirement planning. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want the bearded guy to come and talk to me. Like, I guess I could meet with him once a year. But I'm just saying, like, as much as I can go, those are real stories, and those are exciting stories, and wow, it'd be great if you were. Probably where you're at in this is, I probably own some of those stocks in my 401k. And and maybe you feel like I do, like you're never quite sure that you've done enough, like you hope you've done enough, and you hope that like the market stays together and that you've diversified enough. And it's just sort of, it's not a feeling of like, oh, I can't wait, this is fantastic. You might be looking forward to retirement, but cracking the books on your retirement account, not so much, and no matter how well it's doing right now. But it's important, right? And I want to tell you, like, even though Jesus said, lay up your treasure in heaven, he didn't mean don't have any treasure here on earth, because Scripture is pretty clear. Like, here's you wonder if prophet's okay in Scripture? Ecclesiastes says this, send your grain across the seas, and in time profits will come back to you. But divide your investments among many places, for you do not know what risk might lie ahead. So if you think about it, like, there was nothing more risky they could do back then than to put their grain, their profit from their farm on a ship. I mean, because who knows if it'll make it there, but they knew that was the way to get the most return out of it. And so you should diversify, and you should take risk. I mean, that's scriptural. It's just good advice. And we also learn Proverbs. King Solomon said, good people leave an inheritance to their grandchildren, but the sinner's wealth passes to the godly. So I say all that to say this, like, you and I have this ability to know that there is amazing opportunity out there. And to know that, like, the story of Bill Gates or the story of Bonnie Brown or Jamie Siminoff, those are not like fictional stories. That's not like Once Upon a Time in a Land Far Away. That's not Star Wars. That's not a movie. That's a real thing. And so there's real opportunity, and it's not out of our reach, really. Like, all of us could invest in those companies. We could be part of that story. But somehow, instead of feeling like and kind of placing ourselves like, oh yeah, I could do a startup, or oh yeah, maybe I'll get stock options, or oh yeah, maybe I'll be able to invest in a way that'll pass on for generations. Most of us don't put ourselves there in the story. We just feel sort of like mildly obligated and irritated by Don up here talking about investments, because you're like, oh, maybe I should think more about my investments. Or I hope my investments are doing okay, or I hope this coronavirus thing doesn't tank the stock market. I saw Jim Cramer say that, and I'm worried about that. So it's weird, like there's all this amazing opportunity, and it's a real thing, but we sort of feel like, oh, I don't know, man, it's just sort of uneasy. And I think there's a lot like that, and the reason why I kind of use that analogy is I think there's a lot like that in our understanding of Jesus and of the kingdom. On one hand, you're here, maybe you're here just because of the donuts, or if it's your first day, yes, it's as weird as it looks. Like, these are actually just people like you, well, maybe worse than you, probably worse than you, because that's what Action Church is about, all of us, but just like average people gathering together to worship Jesus. I'm a guy who paints apartments and houses for a living, like just average people, working people. We're not professionals, but we gather together in this building to worship this carpenter's assistant who died 2,000 plus years ago, and his disciples says, his friends and family said he came back to life and he was the Son of God. And if you think about it, I like to think of it as sort of the original IPO. Like, Jesus took the afterlife, Jesus took this idea of God the Creator and went public with it. Because what he said is, before he went back to heaven, he said, you will receive power, talking to his followers. You will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes on you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth. And you and I might not be able to prove that Jesus was the Son of God. I believe that to be true. But we know this part happened. We know this part happened, like we are the proof that this happened. He said, you will receive power. Yes, they did. Something happened to these like unemployed, commercial fishermen and laborers. And it was funny because I always think about, like, one was a tax collector, which is sort of like a sellout to the Romans. And Simon was a zealot. So he's like this militia guy trying to kill all Romans. And yet they worked on the same team. And so all of a sudden, like, we know they received power because we find, like, Peter, who is this commercial fisherman with like a really bad mouth standing before kings, telling the story of Jesus and not backing down even to, when he's put to death, he doesn't back down. He's like, no, I saw what I saw, and I know he's alive, and I know he was the Son of God. So we know that happened because we know this happened. We know those average people, like when this thing went public, when the IPO happened, like somehow they become shareholders in the kingdom, and they go out and they spread it everywhere. Like we know we're in Pennsylvania, we're in North York, talking about this thing that happened thousands of years ago. But we also know that the Romans killed Christ, and 300 years later, they're putting crosses on their buildings and crosses on their shields and saying, in his name we conquered. Like this thing took over. And for all of our sort of skepticism and all of our sort of like modernity, like we still have this huge contingent, billions of people on the planet that believe this to be true. And the angel said that we would stop looking into heaven, and that's also true. We don't go outside every morning and just go, hey, when are you coming back? I mean, even though, like, we shouldn't forget that he is returning. But thousands of years later, we're not just staring into the sky going, well, I can't wait till Jesus comes back and fix this. Think about the things like so much of our world is shaped by the teachings of Jesus. The way we treat our children is shaped by Jesus. Like at the time of Jesus, they had a thing called weathering, where if you had too many kids, or you had a kid you didn't like, or you had a kid that that wasn't, oh my goodness, we gather around a kid that has some sort of problem or disability. No, you know what they did? They put them outside. And they said, you know what? The gods will decide. We weather them. We let them out to the weather and we see what happens. But Christians started picking those kids up and started adopting those children and started caring for those children, because Jesus said, suffer the little children to come unto me and don't forbid them. So like the way we look at our children today has been shaped by this story. The way we look at women has certainly been shaped by the way this story played out. Because what they thought of women then compared to what we think of women now, oh man, thankfully, because I've got a daughter and a son, it's like, oh my goodness, how we value women totally came out of early Christianity. And that wasn't things Jesus did, that was things his followers did, because they had power and they went out and they were his witnesses, and they stopped just staring into heaven waiting for him to do something. And so, as exciting as that is, and it is sort of, oh wow, that's probably the biggest story that's ever been told, somehow you and I can still turn that into, I guess we should sort of plan to retire in heaven when we die. Right? Like there's a little bit of that. It turns into that, like, oh, life is life, and I go through life and it's sort of the same whether I'm a Christian or not a Christian. But just like retirement, we sort of think it is going to come eventually. Eventually I will die, so maybe I should give up a few things now so that I'll be prepared for later. And so many of us in our world, even though I'm telling you that story, and even though that story I believe is true, and I think we can actually, if we're just honest with ourselves, we can demonstrate that's true, because just the fact we're talking about it shows that something happened. But just like the story of every amazing IPO that happened in the last 20 years, we can sort of turn it into, I guess I should read this literature that I have on the resurrection. I can feel like the Bible's like the prospectus and we should read it more, or some, or any. And yeah, I guess I should go to the meeting, church once a week maybe, or once a month at least. And maybe I should put some money away for heaven, or maybe I should slack off, maybe I should lay off a few sins now because that'd be better. So I'll have a better, so we can sort of take this amazing story, just like we can take the story of, the Microsoft IPO and turn that into, I guess I own some Microsoft somewhere. I haven't read the prospectus lately. And we can turn this whole story of Jesus into, okay, maybe because I believe in Jesus, when I die, I'll retire in heaven. And it's interesting because our view of heaven is sort of this, I think it sounds terrible, quite frankly. Like, I do not want to lay around on a cloud and play a harp. I don't like playing a harp now, and if I lay down too long, I get a backache. And I can't imagine that's going to get better for all eternity. But somehow that's what we have heaven. Like, oh, it's better than the alternative, It's like, Florida, not great, but it's better than the alternative. It's like, oh my goodness. I don't know. We just have that ability to do that. And I'm not picking on you because, like, man, I've felt like that. Kind of like, oh, heaven is this place, and I hope I'm prepared. Now, I want to read to you something because Paul breaks it down, I think, in such a way that it's just so brilliant. And that's the thing that I love about the story of the resurrection and this story of early Christianity is, on one hand, you have like, yeah, I relate to the blue-collar dummies that Jesus gathered around him. Like, he's got like the fishermen and the farmers, and like he's got these guys who are not educated. In fact, they were known for not being educated because they actually said, like, how are these guys so eloquent? Like, they're unschooled men. But then at the same time, Paul, the apostle, known as Saul at that time, is probably the best known mind of the time. And he hates Christianity. He's actually going around killing Christians. He's sort of knocked off his donkey on the road to Damascus by Jesus, meets Jesus, and becomes the greatest teacher that this faith has ever known. So sort of the best mind. I always think it's like if Elon Musk and the Duck Dynasty guys got together and go, yep, saw Jesus, it's real. Like that sort of width of intellect, and I love the guys in Duck Dynasty. I think they're pretty smart, but that's just me. But if you think of like the greatest known intellect and the guys that everybody sort of looks down on, even though they were wise, and I'm not making fun of blue collar because I think wisdom comes from blue collar. But that's what happened. And so Paul breaks this down, and I want to read this sort of in this last week of this because I think it's so helpful. And I think it paints a picture of something far different than, hey, we should put a little something aside to retire in heaven. Because that is not what Paul says at all. It says, the Spirit of God, this is taken from Romans 8, who raised Jesus from the dead lives in you. And just as God raised Christ Jesus from the dead, he will give life to your mortal bodies by the same Spirit living within you. Therefore, dear brothers and sisters, you have no obligation to do what your sinful nature urges you to do. For if you live by its dictates, you will die. But if through the power of the Spirit you put to death the deeds of your sinful nature, you will live. For all of you who are led by the Spirit of God are children of God. So you have not received a spirit that makes you fearful slaves. Instead, you received God's Spirit when he adopted you as his own children. And now we call him Abba Father, which is not the Swedish pop group. It's like saying Daddy God. Abba Father, for this Spirit joins with our spirit to affirm that we are God's children. And since we are his children, we are his heirs. In fact, together with Christ, we are heirs of God's glory. But we are to share his glory, we must also share his suffering. Yet what we suffer now is nothing compared to the glory he will reveal to us later. For all creation is waiting eagerly for the future day when God will reveal who his children really are. This sounds nothing like this idea that so many of us have of, hey, life is one thing, but maybe when I die, I should prepare for this completely different thing, and maybe I should put aside a little something for when I retire, and maybe I should slack off the sinning just a little bit because then I'll have a better mansion over there. And it doesn't sound anything like that. Because you notice it says the Spirit of God who raised Jesus from the dead lives in you. That's what Jesus said to his disciples. That's what happened to them. And what he's saying is if we are part of God's family, if we are part of this new kingdom, if we've taken part in the initial public offering of the kingdom of God, he's like, the same Spirit Jesus had, that's the Spirit you had in you. Like the miraculous power that he had comes to us. This is not like when we, and notice, like, if you think this is about like when you die, you go to heaven, there's no mention of that in this. It's amazing like how much of Scripture is, when it talks about the kingdom of God, like very, very, very little of it is based on going to heaven. It's sort of like, I had a guy, it's funny over the years, like work with my son and we get along great, but like over the years trying to hire different people to work with me, I'm terrible to work with. I don't like to stop. I don't like to eat. I don't like to breathe. I just like to work. And I had a guy that started with me years ago, and he got out of his truck, and he came pretty highly recommended, and he said, when can I smoke and when's lunch? That was his first, I swear to you, those first words. And I go, I'll pay you for today, but you can just get in your truck. Like that, we never even worked together because I knew it wasn't going to work. But imagine like if somebody came to you at your job and just basically didn't want any information about the work. They just wanted to know about the retirement. You know, that's really what, as people, when we come to Scripture and kind of just go, oh, I just want to know about heaven. It's as ridiculous as starting a new job and going, I don't need to know what you do here. In fact, I'm not even planning on showing up. I'll show up, tell me how many days I can miss. Right? Like, how many days, what's the least I have to do to get retirement? Because I want retirement. You know, you wouldn't last a second, but yet we think like, oh, that's what Christianity's about? Oh, no, it's not. In fact, nothing like that. And then he also says, like, then the other sort of bad information we have about Christianity is like, oh, then we sort of walk around on eggshells, like, oh, we don't want to sin because we'll go to hell, so we gotta walk around and try to do the right thing all the time and not do the right, and we get just totally like just burn out trying to like, oh, I did the wrong thing, and then I did the right thing. It says you don't have the spirit that makes you fearful slaves. Like so many of you probably, if you were raised in church, you've probably heard a lot about like fearing hell rather than actually living a life filled with power from the Spirit. And this is so clear, like that is not it. That is not it. Like walking through life just fearing punishment has nothing to do with this. It's like you haven't received a spirit. You're not slaves. You're not slaves at all. In fact, here's the thing about what Paul said that is so sort of encouraging and brilliant, because if you think about it, like I'm using, and I know it's not maybe the best analogy, like this idea of Jesus at IPO. I'm uncomfortable with Jesus being the CEO, and I'm sure he would tell me to cut it out if he were here. I get that, but I wanted to use a different picture than rabbi, teacher, Jew, because we don't have any sort of understanding of that. But I do think like I can make a case for you that Jesus started this brilliant startup that changed the world. But they didn't have any of that. Like, if you were going to receive an inheritance from someone, there was only one path. And in fact, you should know that at this time, like we think of adoption as being children, they actually had adult adoption at that time, which I think would be sweet. Wouldn't you like that's the best time to be adopted, wouldn't it? Like like if somebody wants to adopt me that's better off than I am, that would be sweet. Like, oh, you just want to take me into your family and give me an inheritance? That's really what happened there. And it was not uncommon in reading up, like it's not uncommon in the Roman culture that they were living in, like they would even adopt servants, which is kind of cool. Like we think of slaves as like, it's a very different idea of slavery that we have now. Because of the horrors of stealing people from another country and bringing them here and making them work. That was not the case. Like people sort of, it was almost apprenticeship in the fact that you didn't want to be a slave, but you would sell yourself into slavery if you ran out of money. Like you would literally go, hey, I can't eat, and so instead of dying, there's no safety net, I will enslave myself to someone else. But there's there's a pathway in there that if you were a really good servant, you could actually be adopted into the family and receive an inheritance. And that's kind of what we feel like Paul is talking about here, because he's writing to Roman citizens. He's going, hey, like if you were a really good servant, not a slave, that's what he's saying, like you don't act like a slave. He's like, you could be adopted into that family. And in fact, and this part is not a bad idea either. Like if you had a kid who was a loser, you might cut him out and adopt one of the servants. And I think that keeps everyone on their toes, right? Like you're like, at any point, I can unadopt you and adopt him. And so that's the culture that they lived in. So they had adult adoption. And so we might think, shareholder. I was thinking about that, like where we would go, hey, you know what? I don't own Google, but I found out it's actually Alphabet. I own a little bit of Alphabet. Like I'm a shareholder in that. Like when they do good, I do good. Actually, they don't do good very often. I think they're spying on me. But anyway, like above, I'm talking financially well. But here's the thing, like, this picture that Paul is painting is not, oh, we just say the right thing once in a while, and we put a little something aside in our account, and maybe someday, instead of going to hell, we'll go to heaven. We'll retire in heaven. It doesn't really affect us now, but, you know, I want to be covered. It's sort of like, I need a retirement account because I want to go to heaven. No. He's going, you are adopted into this family business. That was the model that they used. And then he says this, he says, if we share in his glory, we must also share in his suffering. So that sort of knocks this idea that we have out the window of that we can sort of just skate through life, maybe not even tell anybody we're a Christian, not really identify as a Christian, that would be weird. Maybe not really change our life very much, but kind of like we could with a retirement account. It's possible that we could go through life and just put a little something aside and it be there when we retire. And that's not at all what Paul was talking about. Because he said, hey, guess what? If you're going to be part of Jesus' glory later, you're going to have to share in his suffering now. Now, thankfully, that meant something different then. Like, I really don't think that if I'm inviting you today, everyone, to go, hey, let's identify with Christ. Let's be a shareholder in the kingdom. And in fact, I've been thinking, like, we've never had members at Action Church for a lot of reasons, but I want to really move into this idea of we're shareholders in the church. This is not a privately held company. This is a publicly, like you are Action Church. You just don't realize it. We are shareholders if we take part in Action Church. And that's the same thing that he's talking about. Like he's talking about in the Big C church, he's like, if you're going to be part of the glory, if you're going to see eternal life and rule and reign with Christ, because that's the picture Jesus used, and that's the picture Paul used. It wasn't sitting on a cloud with a harp, thankfully, because that sounds terribly boring to me, but it was ruling and reigning, and you go, what are we going to rule and reign? I don't know, and that's the exciting part. There's something coming next, and he's looking for helpers, for shareholders, for people to join him in that, and it sounds exciting. But you're probably not going to be killed for this. All right, so that's good, right? Your suffering is probably literally, like Paul is talking to people that are going to get beat for this. But I will tell you, if you identify with Christ in 2020 in America, you may take some ridicule. In fact, if you start thinking like Christ thinks about life and about, gender and about the creation, and you're probably going to find yourself at odds with like most people, most cultural, like definitely with movies and print journalists. And I mean, you're going to find yourself at odds with much of our culture, both political parties. You're going to find yourself at odds with most things on this planet other than other Christians. And there may be, I tell you the truth, like there may be some suffering involved. At least some people, in fact, it was interesting looking at, I just saw some polling, and they were asking people like, would you vote for a president who's over 70, over 80? Would you vote for a gay president? Would you vote for a woman president? Would you vote for, they had all these different sort of like metrics of what kind of president would you vote for. And the things that came in lowest was evangelical Christian and Muslim. And I thought, isn't that interesting? Like of all the things, like, oh, we don't want those evangelical Christians. They're scary. Woo. But that is our culture. That's good to know. That's good to know that that's what people think. So understand, like, identifying with Christ, there may be some blowback. In fact, there probably will be if you're doing it right. Like there's going to be a few times that you're going to be misunderstood and someone's going to say, oh, that means you're a bigot or that means you're hateful. But that's what they said about Jesus. Jesus is the only sinless person to ever live, and they killed him. So I don't think, so, but here's what it says then, and I think this is so important because this is sort of that picture of what, like if you think of Bonnie Brown, the lady I told you about a few weeks ago who, went to work for Google as a massage therapist, making $450 a week in San Francisco, which even in 2000 or 1999 wasn't a lot of money. Like, it's tough to live by yourself. I think she's going to have a roommate at $450 a week. Yet because of that choice, because she stayed with Google, she kept getting these stock options, and she said at first she thought they were worthless because if you think about it, at that time there were so many startups that are just going under. But that decision made her a multi-millionaire. I mean, not just that, like, this is not just about money. It was like, if you think about her life, she now has a nonprofit where she helps people. She goes around, she's just an immensely wealthy lady helping people. Her life was completely changed. She thought it was over, but it was just beginning. And that's what Paul said. He said, no matter what you suffer, and he was saying this to people who might really die and who would definitely be beaten and thrown out of society. He said, yet what we suffer now is nothing compared to glory that will be revealed to us later. He's like, this investment, you can't even imagine how this investment can pay off for you. And then he said, for all creation is waiting eagerly for the future day when God will reveal whose children really are. See, that doesn't sound to me at all like you can just sort of sign up for a retirement account and silently throw just put aside a little bit now. Knock off a few sins and maybe do a good deed once in a while, and nobody knows about it, but someday you'll show up and Peter will be at the gates and he'll go, welcome in, here's your cloud. Because he said, no. Like, creation is waiting to see who these people really are because they are going to see a payoff no one could imagine. Now, I know that's sort of like, I think it's brilliant. I think it lays it out better than anything I could do. But it's a little lawyer-y. It's not reading a bill from the House, but it's scholarly at least, right? And so I know some of us relate to things differently. Maybe you're a person who reads something like that and you follow the logic and you go, oh, that I get that. But not all of us do. I get that art can touch you sometimes in a way that scholarly articles can. So I'm so excited about this. I'm going to do a dramatic reading for you. I don't think I've ever done this. I'm going to read the lyrics to a song. Well, let me just do it. And I've been practicing for this, so I'm a little nervous. Yeah, you got that yummy yum. That yummy yum. That yummy yummy, yeah, you got that yummy yum. That yummy yum, that yummy yummy. Now, here's the thing. The guy who wrote that, Justin Bieber. Now, I never say this about celebrities because I'm so nervous when I do that. But I saw an interview with him this week, and I'm going to say something I never say about celebrities who become Christians. I always say wait and see. Because I think that's the same for you and me, right? Like we say, a lot of people come through the doors, a lot of people get baptized, a lot of people go, hey, I'm a Christian now. And you kind of wait and see. But Justin, if I can call him that, the writer of this wonderful lyric, which, by the way, is about his new wife, so I think that's okay. I make no judgment. It might be brilliant because I can't stop hearing it in my head. That guy with a neck tattoo who wrote yummy, 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 I think understands what Paul said better than any preacher I've ever heard. So let me play what Justin said this week as he was being, and I want you to realize, this is not him talking like, hey, I'm going to talk about Christianity. This is him being interviewed about his new album, Changes. Check this out.
I just didn't know what the heck was going on, and so I really took a deep dive in my faith, to be honest. I just went deep into, I believed in Jesus, but I never really, when it says following Jesus is actually turning away from sin, and so there's no, what it talks about in the Bible, it's like there's no obedience. There's no faith without obedience. So it's like I had faith about I believe Jesus died on the cross for me, but I never really implemented it into my life. I never was I'm gonna be obedient.
So when did you decide to actually move within the guidelines, and how did you find yourself away from, yeah, I believe in Jesus, but I'm going to drink or do drugs or sleep around or all these other distractions? How did you get out of that world? What was the turning point for you?
I think it was my perception of who Jesus really was, you know. I had really bad examples of Christians in my life who would say one thing and do another. So they were my direct example of who Jesus was.
That's why you didn't take it seriously.
I didn't take it as seriously because I didn't have good examples. Yeah, the way I look at my relationship with God and with Jesus is I'm not trying to earn God's love by doing good things. God has already loved me for who I am before I did anything to earn it and deserve it. It's a free gift by accepting Jesus and just giving your life to him. And what he did is the gift. The forgiveness is the thing that we look at and, you know, I'm going to worship you, God, because you gave me something so good.
I want the band to come back up here. But here's the thing. Yeah, he gets it. He's a brother. Even though he wrote, yummy, 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 yum. And here's what I want you to think about this morning. Like, if you think that somehow this Christianity thing is sort of like, kind of like a retirement account that's sort of like you're going to have to give up a few things now if you want to be prepared for the future, it's kind of a drag. That's not what Justin said. You never hear him talk about, I'm doing this so I can go to heaven someday and avoid hell. Not what he said at all. And you and I might think, oh, well, we got to give up a little sinning now so we can make it into heaven later. Not what Justin Bieber said, and keep this in mind. Like you and I go, I guess I'm going to give up drinking and drugs and sex. It's like, we have no idea because, like, quite honestly, I can't even really afford drugs. Seems like that would be a lot of money. I don't really have that in the budget. You know, like, and nobody's offering, so it's like I'm not really giving up anything. But Justin Bieber is. Really, like, you think about, like, if you say, oh, well, drugs are my thing, or drink is my thing, or sex, or fame, or money, oh my goodness, he's got more than any of you and I put together could ever experience. And you know what he says? He said Jesus saved him from it. That's remarkable, isn't it? And he said the greatest thing that he's ever experienced is really meeting Jesus. And he said the only thing that held him back is like people like us who don't really mean what we say. We just have this idea like, oh, maybe someday I'll go to heaven, so I'm willing to put aside a little now, like a retirement account. That's not what Paul said, and that's definitely not what changed Justin's life. And so I want to pray with you. And I don't say that so you'll feel bad, like, oh, I'm kind of one of those retirement people, and I haven't taken this seriously. Like, I get that. That's what we do as humans. But this could be the day when that changes. This could be the day when you actually experience God's power in your life in a way that you go, this is not something for when I die. This starts now, like Justin said. So I want to pray. Dear Jesus, God, we are so blessed and fortunate to have this offer. It's better than any stock option that could ever happen. It's not money, it's so much bigger than that. God, I thank you for our brother, Justin Bieber, who came to you, who came to the realization that all of the things that we sort of chase after in our meager, pathetic ways, like all the things he received as a very young person, he realized like none of those things satisfy. God, I pray for every person here. They're not here by accident. And God, I know that we're all in sort of various places in our walk, in our relationship with you. But God, I know just by statistics that many of us sort of think of heaven as a retirement opportunity, as sort of a retirement fund. God, I pray that we walk away understanding the true possibilities of the kingdom. And God, that this church will become a place where we walk in power and we walk in community and we reach out to each other and and we become witnesses to those around us. And God, I know that when we do that, there will be some suffering, that people won't always react positively to us doing that. But God, we know it's so worth it. And God, I just pray for strength for everyone who attempts that today. In your name we pray. Amen.